The crystal cities of the Galactic Peace Union were dying. Flames licked at their beautiful towers while screams echoed through streets that had known only peace for thousands of years. High Counselor Vexera pressed her translucent hand against the command center's viewing window, watching her world burn. Her people were made of living crystal, beings of light and harmony who had never known true violence. Now they faced extinction. The void swarm moved like a plague across the stars. These weren't living creatures, but something far worse. Mechanical monsters that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing but empty space behind. They had already devoured the peaceful worlds of Lumina Prime, Crystal Falls, and New Haven. Each system fell in mere days, their populations vanishing without a trace. Vexera said. A young crystal being named Morden rushed to her side. His normally bright glow was dim with fear. Counselor, the defensive satellites are failing. The swarm. Ships are breaking through our outer perimeter. The counselor nodded slowly. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but they had no choice. Her people were pacifists by nature, with no weapons, no warships, no soldiers. They'd always relied on diplomacy and their ancient alliance with the Harmony Fleet, a group of peaceful mediator species who helped resolve conflicts across the galaxy. Activate the quantum beacon, she ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. Send the emergency signal to the Harmony Fleet. Tell them we need immediate assistance. Morden's crystalline features showed confusion. Counselor, the Harmony Fleet is halfway across the galaxy. Even with their fastest ships, they won't arrive for weeks. We have hours at most. Then pray they bring their entire armada. Vexera replied. It's our only hope. The ancient quantum beacon hummed to life, its golden energy filling the chamber. This device was older than their civilization, left behind by mysterious predecessors who had vanished eons ago. It could send messages instantly across impossible distances, cutting through space and time itself.
Normal circumstances.
Trained technicians would carefully calibrate the frequency to reach their intended target. But with the swarm ships already entering their atmosphere, there was no time for precision. Morden's hands shook as he inputted the Harmony Fleet's coordinates. Outside, explosions lit up the sky as more of their cities fell. The mechanical screech of swarm harvester ships grew louder by the minute. In his panic, he miscalculated the quantum frequency by several decimals, a tiny error that would change the fate of the galaxy. The beacon fired its message into the void. But instead of traveling through normal space to reach the Harmony Fleet, it tore through dimensional barriers like a knife through fabric. The distress call hurtled through folded spacetime, past peaceful worlds and through regions no crystal being had ever imagined existed, far away in the Outer Rim territories. A very different kind of fleet patrolled the darkness between stars. The United Earth ship Thunderstrike cut through space like a predator, its hull scarred from countless battles. This was humanity's frontier navy, tasked with protecting Earth's colonies from pirates, raiders, and worse threats that lurked in the galaxy's lawless regions. Admiral Kim Tejo stood on the bridge, studying tactical displays that showed shipping, routes, and known pirate hideouts. He was a veteran of the Centauri Wars, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. His crew respected him because he brought them home alive. Mission after mission, Lieutenant Park Minho sat at the communications station, monitoring dozens of frequencies for any sign of trouble. Most days were quiet out here, but when things went wrong, they went very wrong very quickly. The lieutenant had been tracking suspicious movement in the Kepler sector when his equipment suddenly exploded with activity. "Sir, I'm picking up something strange," Minho called out. "It's not using any standard communication protocol. The signal strength is incredible. Whatever sent this has power levels off the charts." Tejo moved to the communications station, his expression serious. "Origin point? Unknown, sir? The signal seems to be coming from multiple dimensions at once. But I'm reading it as a military distress beacon. Someone's in serious trouble." The Admiral studied the data streaming across Minho's screens. The message was garbled, filled with static and strange harmonics, but certain elements were unmistakable. Someone was under attack and needed immediate military assistance. "Battle stations," Tejo commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge. All hands to combat positions. Looks like we've got pirates hitting civilian targets again. Warning klaxons echoed through the thunderstrike as the crew prepared for battle. Throughout the fleet, other captains received similar orders. Destroyer crews loaded their railguns while fighter pilots ran pre-flight checks on their interceptors. This was what they trained for, protecting the innocent from those who would prey upon them. The human war fleet jumped to hyperspace. Ships bristling with weapons designed for one purpose: winning battles. They had no idea they were racing toward first contact with an alien civilization, or that they were about to become legends whispered about in crystal cities across the galaxy. The peaceful space around the crystal homeworld suddenly erupted in brilliant flashes of light. Where moments before there had been only the gentle glow of dying cities, now massive shapes materialized from hyperspace. But these weren't the sleek, curved vessels of the Harmony fleet that the crystal beings had expected. These were warships, brutal angular monsters covered in weapon ports and armor. Plating thick enough to stop asteroids, the crystal ships that had been trying to evacuate. Civilians scattered in all directions like a flock of startled birds. Their captains had never seen anything like the human fleet before. The largest vessel, the Thunderstrike, was longer than 3 city blocks and bristled with enough firepower to level a continent. Smaller destroyers flanked it, their hulls painted. In the gray and black colors of war, on the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Kim Tae-ho surveyed the scene through his tactical display. He saw the fleeing crystal vessels and frowned. Why are the civilian ships running from us? We're here to help them. Lieutenant Park Min-ho checked his sensors again. Sir, I'm not detecting any hostile forces in the area. It's just these crystal ships in what looks like a heavily damaged space station. Maybe the pirates already left, suggested Commander Yoon Jinna, the ship's tactical officer. But why would civilians be afraid of a rescue fleet? Tae-ho shook his head. Something felt wrong about this whole situation, but they had a job to do. Prepare a boarding party. We need to make contact with the local authorities and find out what happened here. Captain Lee Soyoung received her orders with professional calm. She was one of the fleet's best boarding specialists, trained to secure hostile vessels and protect civilian populations. Her combat armor was designed to intimidate enemies while keeping her alive in the worst conditions imaginable. The suit made her look like a walking tank, covered in sensors, weapons, and enough armor to stop rifle bullets. Rodriguez. Kim, Park, you're with me, she told her squad. Full combat gear? We don't know what we're walking into? The boarding shuttle approached the largest crystal ship slowly, its hull scarred from whatever battle had taken place here. Soyoung could see through the transparent walls that the beings inside were definitely not human. They looked like they were made of living glass, their bodies glowing with soft inner light. Most of them were huddled together in what appeared to be terror. Friendly contact, Soyoung announced over her suit's external speakers as the shuttle docked. We're here to help. But her words only seemed to make things worse. The crystal beings pressed themselves against the far walls of their ship, their glow dimming with fear. Some of them were actually crying, tears that looked like liquid diamonds falling from their translucent faces. The boarding party moved through the alien corridors, with weapons lowered. Date. Their heavy boots clanged against the smooth crystal floors, echoing loudly in the hushed ship. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with nervous energy. Responding to the emotions of their creators, they found the ship's command center easily enough. It was the brightest room. It's filled with floating displays made of pure light. A tall crystal being stood in the center, wearing what looked like ceremonial robes. This had to be their leader. I am Captain Lee Soyoung of the United Earth Navy, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through her suit speakers. Received your distress signal and came as quickly as possible. The crystal being, Counselor Vexara, stared at the armored human in shock. The translation matrix in her ship's computer struggled to convert the alien words into something she could understand. When it finally worked, her worst fears were confirmed. Please, she managed to say, her voice trembling like wind chimes in a storm. We called for mediators, not Deathworlders. Soyoung paused, confused by the alien's reaction. She reached up and removed her helmet, revealing a kind face with concerned brown eyes. Her black hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. And despite the intimidating armor, her expression was gentle and professional. "Ma'am, we received your distress call," she said carefully. "Where's the hostile force?" "Our sensors show signs of recent combat, but we can't locate the enemy." The question sent a wave of panic through the crystal beings watching from the corridors. They had heard the legends, whispered stories passed down through generations of peaceful species. Deathworlders were beings from high-gravity planets where everything tried to kill you. They were said to be violent by nature, seeing conflict where others saw opportunity for peace. They supposedly grew stronger through battle and feared nothing in the universe, and now they were here, asking about enemies to fight. Vexara exchanged terrified glances with her aide Morden. The young crystal being was shaking so hard that his inner light flickered like a dying star. Around them, other members of their species whispered prayers to their ancient gods. Begging for mercy from these legendary warriors, the humans had no idea that their very presence was causing a diplomatic crisis. To them, this was just another rescue mission. They saw frightened civilians who needed protection and were confused by their terror. The crystal beings, however, saw their greatest nightmares made real. Warriors from the forbidden worlds where peace was unknown and violence was a way of life. "Captain," Swalyung tried to reassure the aliens by speaking more gently, but her combat, armor, and the weapons of her squad made her words meaningless. Every piece of human equipment was designed for war, from their reinforced boots to their advanced targeting systems. Even their rescue equipment looked like weapons to beings who had never seen true military hardware. The crystal beings huddled together, wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. They had called for help against the Void Swarm, but what if their rescuers were worse than their destroyers? What if the cure was more dangerous than the disease? Outside, more human ships moved into protective positions around the crystal vessels, their weapon systems scanning for threats that no longer existed. The Void Swarm had retreated when they detected the approaching human fleet, but the aliens didn't know that yet. All they knew was that the legendary Deathworlders had answered their call for help, and now they would have to live with the consequences. The main conference room aboard the Thunderstrike had been hastily converted for the most important diplomatic meeting in human history. Admiral Kim Taeho sat across from Counselor Vexara and her delegation, trying to make sense of what the crystal beings were telling him. The translation matrix hummed softly between them, converting thoughts and words across the impossible gap between species. "Let me understand this correctly," Taeho said slowly, leaning forward in his chair. "You're asking us to restore harmony? To your region of space?" Vexara's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. She had spent the last hour trying to explain their situation to these terrifying Deathworlders, hoping against hope that they might show mercy. "Yes, Admiral. The Void Swarm has disrupted the natural balance of our worlds. We need peaceful resolution, diplomatic intervention to convince them to leave our space." The Admiral nodded and turned to his tactical display, where red markers showed the approaching enemy fleet. The Void Swarm was massive, hundreds of ships moving in perfect formation toward the crystal homeworld. Their vessels looked like mechanical insects, all sharp angles and cutting edges designed for one purpose: consumption. "Copy that," Taeho said matter-of-factly. "We'll eliminate the hostile threat and restore peace to the region." The moment those words left the translation matrix, chaos erupted among the crystal beings. Morden actually fell backward off his chair, his inner light flashing in panic. Other delegates began making high-pitched sounds that the translator couldn't convert their species equivalent of screaming Commander Yungina. Watched the alien reaction with growing confusion. She was the fleet's diplomatic officer, trained to handle first contact situations. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. They seem to think we're going to destroy everything." Frowned. He prided himself on clear communication, especially when civilian lives were at stake. "Negative, Commander. Our rules of engagement are crystal clear. Protect civilian populations, eliminate threats to non-combatants. Standard peacekeeping protocols." He turned back to the alien delegation, his weathered face showing genuine concern. "Counselor Vexara, I want to make something absolutely clear. We're here to help, not to conquer. My fleet exists to protect innocent people from those who would harm them." But his reassuring words only made things worse. The crystal beings had grown up hearing stories about the legendary Deathworlders, beings from high-gravity worlds where survival meant constant warfare. According to the tales, these creatures couldn't distinguish between protection and destruction. They solved every problem with violence because violence was all they understood. Vexara's voice trembled as she spoke. Admiral, when you say eliminate the hostile threat, what exactly do you mean? I mean, we'll engage the enemy fleet in combat and destroy their ability to harm your people, Tejo replied, confused by the question. Standard fleet engagement protocols. We'll target their weapon systems first to minimize casualties, then disable their engines and life support. Any ships that surrender will be taken prisoner according to interstellar law. The crystal beings exchanged horrified glances. To them, the Admiral had just described mass murder dressed up in military terminology. Their species had evolved beyond physical conflict millions of years ago. They resolved disputes through meditation, discussion, and careful negotiation. The idea of deliberately damaging another being's ship, potentially killing the crew inside, was almost incomprehensible. But surely, Morden whispered, there must be another way. Could we not communicate with the swarm? Find out what they truly want? Lieutenant Park Min-ho, who had been quietly monitoring communications, looked up from his station. Sir, I've been trying to establish contact with the swarm fleet for the past 2 hours. They're not responding to any standard diplomatic frequencies. In fact, they're actively jamming our attempts at communication. That's because they're not interested in talking, added Commander Jinna grimly. I've been studying their movement patterns. This isn't a military formation designed for occupation or negotiation. They're arranged for maximum harvesting efficiency. They're here to strip these worlds bare. Outside the conference room windows, the human fleet was already moving into battle formation.
There.
The sight sent fresh waves of terror through the Crystal delegation. They watched as massive destroyers took flanking positions while fighter squadrons launched from carrier bays. Every movement was precise, coordinated, and absolutely terrifying to beings who had never seen military operations before. The Crystal. Ships that had been fleeing earlier now hung motionless in space, their crews paralyzed by indecision. Should they run from both the swarm and their supposed rescuers? Should they try to hide? Their entire civilization had no framework for understanding what they were witnessing. Admiral Vexara said desperately, perhaps if we offered the swarm something valuable, they would agree to leave peacefully. We have rare crystals, energy sources, works of art that might interest them. Tejo shook his head. Ma'am, with respect, these aren't pirates or raiders looking for profit. According to our tactical analysis, the Void Swarm consumes everything. Organic matter, metals, energy sources, even the planets themselves. They're not here to steal from you. They're here to erase you completely. The brutal honesty of his words hit the crystal beings like a physical blow. They had hoped, even in their darkest moments, that some kind of peaceful solution was possible. But the Admiral's assessment matched their own worst fears about the swarm's true nature. On the tactical display, the red markers representing the Void Swarm continued their relentless advance. Their estimated time of arrival had dropped to less than 6 hours. Soon they would enter the system's outer planets, beginning their harvest of everything the crystal civilization had built over millennia. Counselor Tejo said gently, I understand this is difficult for your people to accept, but sometimes the only way to protect peace is to fight for it. My crew has sworn an oath to defend innocent lives, and that's exactly what we intend to do. The crystal beings huddled together, whispering in their musical language, while the translation matrix struggled to keep up. They were facing an impossible choice: trust their fate to legendary Deathworlders who solved problems with weapons, or face extinction at the hands of the mechanical plague heading their way. As if summoned by their fears, new alarms began sounding. Throughout the human fleet, the Void Swarm had just entered the outer edge of the star system, their dark ships moving like a plague of metal locusts ready to devour another peaceful world. The time for talking was over. The battle began exactly as Admiral Kim Tae-ho had predicted it would. The Void Swarm's massive fleet entered the crystal system like a dark tide, their mechanical ships blotting out the stars. For countless eons, this moment had meant the same thing across the galaxy. Another civilization about to be consumed, another species about to vanish into the endless hunger of the machine plague. But something was different this time. Instead of fleeing or attempting futile negotiations, the human fleet accelerated directly toward the approaching nightmare. The Thunderstrike's engines roared to life as Tejo gave the order that would echo through galactic history. All ships engage at will. Show them what happens when they threaten innocent people. The crystal beings watched in absolute terror as their supposed saviors charged headfirst into certain death. From their perspective, the human fleet looked impossibly small compared to the swarm's massive armada. Hundreds of mechanical harvesters, each the size of a city, advanced in perfect formation while the human ships numbered barely 24. What the aliens couldn't understand was that humans had been fighting impossible odds since they first picked up sticks to defend their caves. Every ship in Tejo's fleet was crewed by volunteers who had chosen military service specifically because they wanted to protect others. These weren't conscripts or reluctant warriors. They were professionals who had trained their entire lives. For moments exactly like this, the first human fighter squadrons hit the swarm's outer perimeter like bullets piercing paper. Pilot Officer Nam Soo-jin rolled her interceptor through a storm of mechanical debris, her targeting computer locking onto the closest harvester ship. The massive vessel bristled with defensive weapons, but she had trained for years in combat. Simulators that were deliberately designed to be harder than real warfare. Phoenix Squadron. This is Soo-jin, she called over the comm. Her voice steady despite flying through what looked like mechanical hell. I'm seeing weak points in their armor plating. These things weren't built to fight back, they're just used. Too easy prey. Her fighter's missiles streaked toward the harvester's power core, punching through layers of alien metal like hot knives through butter. The explosion that followed lit up space for thousands of kilometers, and Soo-jin whooped with excitement as she pulled her ship away from the expanding fireball. One more for the good guys, she laughed, already lining up her next target. The crystal beings listening to the human communications couldn't believe what they were hearing. These Deathworlders were actually enjoying themselves in the middle of the most terrifying battle their species had ever witnessed. How could anyone find joy in such violence? What they didn't understand was that humans weren't fighting for the thrill of combat. They were fighting for the crystal children hiding in the evacuation ships, for the crystal families huddled in underground shelters, for the right of an entire species to continue existing. The laughter and excitement weren't about destruction. They were about hope. On the bridge of the destroyer Han River, Captain Yu Ji-hoon watched his tactical display with professional satisfaction. Gunnery. Target that cluster of harvester ships. Full broadside. Armor-piercing rounds. The ship's main cannons erupted in sequence, sending streams of metal projectiles across space at a significant fraction of light speed. Each round hit with the force of a small nuclear weapon, punching through swarm armor that had been designed to shrug off the desperate attacks of dying civilizations. Direct hits across the board, Captain, reported his weapons officer. 3. Harvester ships are showing critical damage. To more are dead in space. Excellent work, people, Ji-hoon replied. Let's show these machines what happens when they threaten our neighbors. But the real shock came when the human boarding parties made contact with individual swarm vessels. Sergeant Choi Hyun-woo led his squad through the airlock of a disabled harvester, their magnetic boots clanking against the metal corridors inside. The swarm had never faced beings who were willing to board their ships and fight them hand-to-hand in the darkness of space. This is Sergeant Choi to all units. His voice crackled over the comm as his squad moved through zero gravity with practiced ease. These bugs picked the wrong fight today. We're inside their command ship and heading for the central processor. The mechanical defenders that swarmed to stop them had been designed to handle desperate, panicked aliens making last-ditch attacks. They weren't prepared for humans who treated boarding actions like a competitive sport. Choi's squad moved through the ship like they owned it, their weapons and tactics adapted from centuries of human warfare. Contact front, called out Corporal Lee Minesco as mechanical defenders rounded the corner ahead. Looks like about a dozen of the spider types. Copy. That, Choi replied, already priming his plasma charges. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth today. We're fighting for every species these things have consumed over the millennia. The battle inside the harvester ship was brief but decisive. The swarm's mechanical defenders were efficient killers, but they operated on programming that assumed their enemies would be afraid. Humans, however, had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill them. Fear was just another tactical consideration to be managed and overcome. Back on the Crystal flagship, Counselor Vexara watched the tactical displays in stunned silence. Engineer Kodehan had somehow managed to interface human weapon systems with crystal technology, creating hybrid weapons that were far more destructive than either species could have built alone. The cheerful humming of the human engineer as he worked was perhaps the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. "These Deathworlders," whispered her aide Morden, his crystalline form flickering with amazement. "They're actually enjoying this." Battle, what the crystal beings couldn't see, was the larger picture. Every human in the fleet was fighting not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right of the crystal people to exist. When Sujin rammed her damaged fighter into a swarm, Hive ship's core, she was thinking about the crystal children she had seen in the evacuation footage. When Sergeant Choi's squad fought through mechanical horrors in zero gravity, they were thinking about families they would never meet but had sworn to protect, the Void Swarm. For the first time in their mechanical existence, encountered something. They had no programming to handle a species that refused to be consumed. As their losses mounted and their tactical algorithms failed to predict human behavior, something unprecedented happened. The mechanical plague that had devoured entire galaxies began to retreat. They had consumed billions of beings over the millennia, but nothing had prepared them for a species that fought back with such organized, professional, and terrifyingly effective enthusiasm. For the first time since their creation, the Void Swarm discovered what it meant to be afraid. The silence after battle was something Admiral Kim Tae-ho had experienced dozens of times throughout his military career. But it never got easier. The tactical display on the Thunderstrike's bridge showed the aftermath of humanity's first major engagement with an alien force, scattered debris where Void Swarm ships had been destroyed, rescue beacons from disabled vessels, and the slow-moving evacuation craft of the Crystal People finally returning to their homeworld. Tae-ho sat in his command chair, methodically filling out the after-action report that would eventually make its way back to Earth's command. His weathered fingers moved across the datapad with practiced efficiency, documenting casualty figures, ammunition expenditure, and tactical lessons learned. To him, this was just another successful peacekeeping mission. Mission accomplished. He dictated to the ship's computer, "Hostile force neutralized with minimal civilian casualties. Void Swarm fleet has been destroyed or driven from the area. Civilian population secured and evacuation operations complete." Commander Yoon Jinna approached his chair, her own reports in hand. She had spent the last several hours coordinating with the crystal beings to ensure their cities were safe and their people could return home. The aliens' reaction to standard post-battle procedures had been ... unusual. "Sir, the Consortium Council is requesting a formal meeting," she reported. "They seem to have some concerns about our ongoing presence in their space." Tae-ho looked up from his report, genuinely puzzled. Concerns? We just saved their entire civilization. What could they possibly be worried about? "I think they're still trying to understand what happened here, sir. Remember, their species has never witnessed military action before. The concept of protective warfare is completely foreign to them." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. "Set up the meeting, and Jinnah, make sure our people understand they're dealing with civilians who've never seen combat. Keep the weapons and armor to a minimum. We don't want to accidentally intimidate them further." An hour later, the main conference room had been transformed once again. The harsh military lighting had been dimmed, and the tactical displays had been replaced with peaceful images of Earth's forests and oceans. Tae-ho had changed from his combat uniform into dress blues, hoping the more formal attire would seem less threatening to the crystal beings. "Counselor." Vexara entered the room with her usual delegation, but their demeanor had changed completely. Where before they had been terrified and desperate, now they seemed amazed and confused. Their crystalline forms glowed with a warm light that the humans had learned indicated curiosity rather than fear. Admiral Vexera began, her voice carrying a musical quality that the translation matrix rendered as cautious optimism. "We must confess that we do not understand what has happened here. Ma'am, we responded to your distress call and eliminated the hostile force that was threatening your people," Tejo replied simply. "Standard peacekeeping protocols." "But why?" asked Morden, the young crystal being who served as Vexera's aide. "Your species traveled across impossible distances too. Fight in a battle that was not yours. Many of your people risked their lives for beings they had never met. We cannot comprehend such behavior." Commander Gana leaned forward in her chair. "With respect, Counselor, it's pretty straightforward. You called for help, and we came. That's what military forces do, protect civilians from those who would harm them." The crystal beings exchanged glances that somehow conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Vexera voiced the question that had been troubling her people since the battle ended. "Admiral Tejo, what do you intend to do now? Will you be claiming our worlds as conquered territory? Do you require tribute or submission from our people?" The silence that followed was broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's life support systems. Tejo stared at the alien leader with complete bewilderment, while Jinnah actually looked offended by the suggestion. "Counselor," the Admiral said slowly, "why would we do any of those things? You called for help, and we provided it. Yes. The end of our involvement, unless you request further assistance." Lieutenant Park Min-ho, who had been quietly monitoring communications during the meeting, looked up from his station with genuine confusion. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand the question. Why would we claim your worlds? You're not our enemies. You're the people we just protected." The crystal beings' glow intensified as they processed this response. According to every legend and story they had heard about Deathworlders, such beings conquered everything they encountered. They were supposed to be driven by an insatiable hunger for territory and resources. The idea that they would simply leave after providing help was beyond their comprehension. "But surely," Vexera persisted, "there must be something you want in return. Payment for your services? Access to our trade routes? Mining rights to our asteroid fields?" Tejo rubbed his forehead, beginning to understand the cultural gap they were dealing with. "Counselor, let me be very clear about something. United Earth Navy exists to protect innocent people from those who would harm them. We don't charge for that service, and we don't expect payment. It's simply what we do." As if to prove his point, reports began filtering in from throughout the crystal system. Captain Lee So-young's Marines had established security perimeters around the major population centers, but instead of acting like occupying forces, they were helping with reconstruction efforts. The Crystal Children, once terrified of the armored humans, were now gathering around the Marines to watch them work in the main nursery complex of the Crystal Capital. So-young herself sat cross-legged on the floor, still wearing her intimidating combat armor, but with her helmet set aside. A group of young crystal beings surrounded her, their forms flickering with curiosity as she taught them a simple human card game. "The key to poker," she explained patiently while the translation matrix converted her words into harmonious chimes, "is not just the cards you're dealt, but how you play them. Sometimes a weak hand can win if you're smart about it." One of the crystal younglings, barely knee-high to the human captain, made a sound that translated as delighted laughter. "Like how your small fleet defeated the big swarm ships?" Smiled and ruffled what passed for the child's hair, a cluster of small crystal formations that tinkled like wind chimes. "Exactly like that, little one. Sometimes being brave and working together is more important than being big and scary." Throughout the crystal cities, similar scenes were playing out. Human engineers worked alongside crystal technicians to repair damage from the swarm attack. Medical personnel shared techniques for treating both human and crystal injuries. Most surprisingly to the aliens, the humans seemed genuinely interested in crystal culture and technology. Not as conquerors evaluating resources, but as friends, learning about their new neighbors. Back in the conference room, Tejo was wrapping up what had become more of a cultural exchange than a military briefing. "We'll maintain patrol routes around your system for the next few months, just to make sure the swarm doesn't return. After that, if you don't need our help anymore, we'll move on to our next assignment. And if we do need help, Vexera asked quietly. Then you call us, and we'll come, Jenna replied without hesitation. That's what allies do. The word allies seemed to resonate through the crystal beings like a bell. They had spent so long thinking of the humans as terrifying Deathworlders that they had missed the obvious truth. These beings weren't conquerors or destroyers, were protectors who had traveled across the galaxy simply because someone had asked for help. As the meeting concluded and the crystal delegation prepared to return to their homeworld, Vexara paused at the conference room door. Admiral, what should we call you in our records? How should we remember this day? Tejo considered the question seriously. It's just right that some friends stopped by to help when you needed it most. But the crystal beings had their own ideas. In the months that followed, as human patrol ships quietly maintained watch over crystal space, and human personnel helped rebuild what the swarm had damaged, the story spread throughout the galaxy. The peaceful species of the consortium began referring to humanity as the Guardian Deathworlders, the most terrifying protectors the universe had ever known. In the mess halls of human warships stationed throughout crystal space, an unusual sight became commonplace. Alien delegates sat at metal tables with human crew members, learning poker and sharing stories while their crystal worlds gleamed safely under the protection of foreign stars. The galaxy had gained its most unlikely guardians, and somehow that made everything feel a little bit safer.